It was a quiet evening in the small town of Elmsfield. The sky was red with sunset, and people were walking back home. Shops were closing, and children were playing in the park. Everything looked normal and peaceful, but something strange was coming. From above at first, there was only a sound like thunder, but no rain. Then the sky started to change color. A huge shadow covered the town. People looked up and saw something they had never seen before. A massive spaceship was floating above the clouds. It was silent and shining like silver. Its shape was like a crown and light was glowing from all sides. People screamed and ran inside their homes. Cars stopped in the middle of the road. Some took videos and uploaded them online. News spread fast. All over the world, military forces were sent to the area. But the ship did not attack. It just stayed still in the sky, like it was watching. After 2 hours, a bright beam of light came from the ship. It touched the ground near the town square. A voice echoed from the sky. It was clear and calm. It said in perfect English, "The Queen of Zandaria wishes to serve herself to the human champion." No one knew what that meant. Who is the Queen of Zandaria? Why does she want to serve? And what is a human champion? The world was confused. Some people thought it was a trap. Others believed it was a gift. Leaders from every country tried to talk to the ship, but got no answer. The ship just waited far. From the town square, in a quiet garage, a man named Ray was fixing an old truck. He was tall with messy hair and oil on his hands. He lived alone and worked with machines all day. He did not care about news or social media. But when the sky turned red, he came out to look. He saw the ship but felt something different. Not fear, but a strange pull in his mind. Later that night, while he was resting, he heard a whisper. It was not outside. It was inside his head. A voice, soft and sad, calling his name. "Ray," it said again and again. He stood up in shock. There was no one in the room, but the voice stayed for a few seconds and then stopped. Ray tried to sleep, but the voice came again. He saw a dream. A tall woman with shining skin and eyes like stars. She wore a silver crown and floated in the air. She looked at him with calm eyes and said, "You are the one I choose." Ray woke up sweating. He thought it was just a strange dream, but the voice felt real. He went outside for air. The sky was dark and the street was empty. Then he heard something behind the bushes near his door, a weak sound like crying. He moved slowly and looked. There he saw something strange and shocking. A woman, but not human. Her skin was light purple. Her clothes were torn and dirty. Her eyes were big and glowing in the dark. She looked scared and tired. She tried to speak, but no words came. Then she fell to the ground unconscious. Ray stood still. He had never seen an alien before. He looked around. No one was there. No camera, no police, no noise. Just him and the alien girl lying at his feet. He did not know why, but he picked her up and brought her inside. He placed her gently on the couch. She was cold and shaking. He gave her water and covered her with a blanket. She opened her eyes for a second and looked at him, then closed them again. Ray sat beside her. His hands were shaking. His mind was full of questions. Who was she? Why did she come to him? Was she the queen or someone else? The voice came again in his head. This time not words, but feelings, fear, pain, hunger, and something else. A cry for help. Ray looked at the alien girl. She looked lost, broken. Not a queen, not powerful, but someone who had run from something. Someone who needed protection. Outside, the spaceship was still in the sky. News channels were still asking the same question. Who is the human champion? Governments were searching. People were waiting. But the real story was not in the news. It was inside a small garage, where a quiet man was now sitting beside a homeless alien girl, and everything was about to change. The night was quiet, but the storm was inside Ray's mind. The alien girl was still sleeping on his old couch. Her face was calm, but her hands were shaking. Ray watched her from the chair with questions in his eyes. He did not know her name or her story, but something inside him felt that she had no one. She looked more like a lost soul than a visitor from the stars. Outside, the world was going crazy. The spaceship was still in the sky. News reporters were shouting on TV. Military Helicopters were flying above the town. People were locked in their homes. Fear and curiosity were spreading like fire. But inside Ray's garage, time was standing still. Ray brought some food and water near the couch. He did not know what she could eat, but he tried anyway. The girl opened her eyes slowly. She looked at the food, then looked at him. Her eyes were deep and glowing like a calm sea. She touched the water glass, but her hands were too weak. Ray helped her without speaking. She drank like she had not tasted water in days. For a few minutes they just looked at each other. No words, no fear, only silence and questions. She tried to speak. Her voice was soft and broken. She made a sound like V. Ray repeated it, and she nodded slowly. From that moment he called her V. Ray took an old blanket and wrapped it around her. She closed her eyes again and went back to sleep. This time with a little comfort. That night Ray sat near her and listened to the news. The voice of the Queen was playing again and again. The same message, the same words. The Queen of Zandaria wishes to serve herself to the human champion. Experts were talking. Some said it was peace. Some said it was a trick. No one understood what the Queen wanted, but one thing was clear. The whole world was waiting for someone to be chosen. Ray turned off the TV. He looked at V. She was nothing like the Queen from his dream. No crown, no light, no power. Just pain and silence. Still, something about her felt stronger than any words. Next morning, V woke up early. She looked around with fear in her eyes. Ray spoke slowly. He used his hands in simple words. She watched him carefully like a child learning again. He pointed at himself and said, "Ray." She said, "V." He pointed at food and said, "Food." She copied his words with effort. Her voice was soft and unsure, but she was learning day by day. V started to move around the garage. She helped clean the place. She fixed small things using tools she had never seen before. Ray was surprised how fast she learned. She had smart eyes and quiet hands, but every night she cried in her sleep. She had nightmares. She spoke words in her own language, words full of pain and fear. Ray could not understand, but he stayed near her. Every time one night it rained hard. Ray gave her a coat and they sat near the window. V looked at the sky and said a few words softly. Ray asked what it meant. She touched her heart and said lost, then touched the sky and said home, then shook her head. Ray understood she had no home, no one waiting for her. She was not just homeless on Earth. She was homeless in the universe. Later that night, Ray cleaned her torn clothes. While checking, he found a small metallic device inside a hidden pocket. It was smooth and glowing faintly. He touched it, and a soft light came out. V saw it and looked scared. She tried to take it from him, but Ray stopped her gently. Suddenly, the device showed a small image in the air, a hologram. It was a picture of a dark room. A tall alien woman in silver dress was sitting on a throne. Many soldiers were kneeling before her. Then V appeared in the frame. She was in chains. She was being dragged across the floor. The Queen looked at her and turned away. Ray was shocked. V had been a prisoner. The Queen was not what she claimed to be. V sat down and covered her face. Her body was shaking. She looked ashamed. Ray sat beside her. He did not speak. He just placed his hand on her shoulder. The next morning, loud sounds filled the sky again. The spaceship moved closer. Another message was sent to Earth. This time it said, "The human champion has been chosen. The meeting will begin in 2 days." People cheered. News exploded. Everyone wanted to know who it was, but Ray stayed silent, because now he knew the truth, and the real story was only beginning. The sky turned golden as the spaceship moved slowly above the mountains. Its shadow stretched across the valleys like a hand searching for someone. The voice returned across every screen, every speaker, every device. The message was clear and soft and deep like music without sound. The human champion has been chosen. The Queen of Zandaria will meet him in 24 hours. Ray stood in the middle of his garage with V sitting quietly behind him. She was holding the small device close to her chest like it was a piece of her soul. Ray had not told anyone about her, not even when soldiers knocked on his door asking questions. He just said he lived alone, and they left without checking too deep. But now things were changing faster. Then he could understand. A black car appeared in front of his house early morning. 3 people stepped out, dressed in dark suits with no flags. No names, no badges. One of them spoke with a voice like metal. "You must come with us." Ray asked nothing. He just looked once at V and nodded. She shook her head in fear, but he gave her a small smile like saying, "Trust me," without words. Then he entered the car, and it drove into the foggy hills far away from the town. They reached a hidden facility built under the earth, covered by rocks and machines. The air inside was cold. The lights were white, the walls were smooth like glass. Ray was guided through long halls filled with silence. He saw scientists staring at floating screens, soldiers checking weapons, and old men arguing in corners. But no one spoke to him directly. He was taken to a large round chamber with a single chair in the center. He was told to sit and wait. Time passed like melting ice. Then the lights dimmed and the ceiling opened. Slowly a platform lowered from above, and there she was. The Queen of Xandariah stood tall, with silver skin and hair that moved like smoke. Her eyes were bright and sharp like 2 stars pulled from space. She wore a gown made of light and jewels that shimmered without end. She looked down at Ray with a face that did not blink. Everyone in the room watched in silence. The cameras turned and started recording. The Queen walked toward Ray without making a sound. She spoke not with her mouth, but with her mind. Her voice entered Ray's thoughts like a dream floating through water. "You are the chosen one. You are the human champion. I offer myself to you." She raised her hands, and the walls lit up, showing images of galaxies, planets, and wars. She showed him empires falling and stars burning and thrones waiting to be filled. She showed herself standing alone, holding the crown of her people. Then she turned and reached toward Ray with grace and power. "Come with me," she said. "Rule beside me. We will become legends across the stars." Ray's heart was not sure what to feel. Her beauty was beyond words. Her voice was calm. Her offer was endless. But his mind returned to a small memory, the sound of V crying in the dark, the feeling of her broken hands fixing his tools, the look in her eyes when she said "lost." The Queen stepped closer and touched his face. The room watched with frozen breath. She leaned forward and whispered into his mind, "Why do you hide her?" Ray's breath stopped. He looked into the Queen's eyes and saw something cold behind the beauty. He stood up slowly and stepped back. The guards in the room moved, but the Queen raised her hand and they stopped. Ray did not answer. He only turned around and walked away outside. The soldiers tried to follow, but he was faster. He found another door, another hallway, another way out. He ran through tunnels and climbed through vents until he reached the surface again. The sky was dark, and the ship was still glowing, but he kept moving. He took a bike from a quiet street and rode through the night back to the garage, back to V. When he opened the door, V stood there waiting. She had packed a small bag and wore clean clothes. Eyes looked into his, and she already knew. Ray nodded. She nodded back. No words were needed. The Queen had offered everything: power, respect, glory. But something in Ray had made a different choice. He had chosen a girl with no home and no crown. A girl who had nothing to offer but truth. And now their journey was no longer quiet. It was about to begin. The wind was strong that night as Ray and V left the town behind. They followed a quiet road that led into the forest where no lights touched the ground. The trees were tall and moved like whispers in the dark. Ray kept his eyes on the path while V sat behind him on the bike, holding tight with silent fear in her breath. They had no map, no plan, no destination, only the need to disappear. The Queen had looked into Ray's mind and seen the truth. She knew about V. She knew Ray had chosen her. And now there was no safety left in the open world. Ray remembered the way the Queen had spoken, not like a leader, but like a hunter. There was something hidden in her words, something that felt like control. He could still feel her voice trying to return inside his head, but he had shut it out like a door locked with memory. After 2 hours they reached an old railway cabin deep in the forest. Ray had once helped repair it when the train still passed through. Now it was broken and empty, but it had walls and a roof, and that was enough. They lit a fire and sat on the floor. V placed the glowing device between them. She looked at it, and then At Ray, he nodded and she touched the side of the small metal cube. The light grew brighter, and the hologram returned. But this time it was not just images. It was a memory. V stood in the middle of a grand hall filled with light. She wore armor made of silver, and her eyes were strong. Beside her stood others like her, proud and tall, all wearing the same crest on their chest. They were protectors of the royal blood. They were called the Bound. Then the Queen entered. She was younger, but already powerful. The hall grew quiet as she walked forward with her head high. She looked at V with a soft smile, but her eyes did not smile at Allah. Voice echoed in the memory. The Queen spoke of unity and control. She wanted peace, but not freedom. She wanted silence, not questions. V had stood against her. She had spoken for the people, for the planets under the crown. She had asked why peace needed fear, why loyalty needed chains. The Queen had called it betrayal. That night the bound were broken. Some were imprisoned. Some vanished. V was taken in the dark and sent to a hidden world, far from the stars. A place where names were erased and hope was forgotten. Memory ended and the room fell silent. Ray looked at V. She sat still with tears in her eyes, not from fear, but from remembering. Ray touched her hand. She did not pull away. Outside, the wind blew harder and the trees whispered secrets only the night could hear. Ray knew now that V was not just an alien girl. She had been a protector. She had stood against a lie, and now the Queen wanted to erase that truth. Suddenly, a noise came from the trees. Ray stood up fast and looked through the cracks in the wall. Lights moved between the branches. Shadows walked slow and careful. V stood beside him. She closed her eyes and placed her hand on the device again. This time a map appeared. A small line glowing red led from the cabin deep into the hills. Ray understood it was time to move again. They left the cabin and entered the woods. Cold bit their skin, but they kept moving behind them. The lights grew closer. After a long walk, they reached a cave hidden by rocks. Inside they found old signs drawn on the walls. Not human signs, alien shapes glowing faint like stars behind smoke. V touched the wall and whispered a name. A soft click came from the stones. A door opened. Inside the cave was a secret camp. Small lights floated in the air. Old machines rested on tables. And in the center stood others, aliens of different shapes and colors. Some were old, some were young. All were quiet. When they saw V, they stepped back. Then slowly they bowed their heads. Ray watched in silence. A tall figure stepped forward. He had skin like stone and eyes like crystal. He looked at V with both sorrow and pride. He spoke in her language, then turned to Ray. He said in broken English, "She was hope once. Now maybe again." V looked at Ray. He looked back at her. In that moment something changed. She was no longer just a fugitive. She was no longer lost. She was part of something bigger. A truth buried by a crown. A story waiting to rise again. And the Queen was no longer the only voice in the sky now. There was another ready to speak. The wind had changed, and the trees no longer whispered softly. They screamed with every breath, as if the forest itself knew what was coming. The cave was no longer safe. The walls shook gently as if something under the ground was waking up. Lights in the sky were no longer stars. They were eyes. Ray stood near the entrance, watching the dark path behind them. His hand rested on the broken blade one of the alien refugees had given him. It was not just a tool, it was a message. Protect or fall. V was inside speaking with the elders. They sat around her like shadows around a flame. Each had a story of escape. Each had seen the Queen from behind her crown. Each had chosen silence until now. Now they spoke, because someone had returned, not to fight for power, but to stand for truth. Ray walked inside, and V looked at him with eyes full of quiet fire. She nodded once. The elders all stood at the same time. The stone-skinned leader who had welcomed them spoke again. His voice was low and steady, like an old mountain still breathing. "They come." Outside the sound grew louder. Engines in the sky, boots on soil. Shadows with weapons that made no sound. Ray and V were no longer hiding. They were hunted. The refugees moved fast, packing their things with quiet hands. Machines once dead now glowed with light. A girl with silver eyes opened the panel in the wall and revealed a tunnel leading into the earth. V turned to Ray and placed her hand on his chest. She spoke one word, together. Ray nodded. They entered the tunnel with others behind them. The path was narrow and the air was thick with dust and memory. Each step echoed like a warning above them. The soldiers arrived at the cave. The queen had sent her finest. Not human, not alien. Something between. They moved without sound, eyes glowing blue, hearts made of metal. They found the cave empty, but they found the map and they followed in the tunnel. Ray helped the younger ones move faster. He carried one who had a broken leg and gave water to a boy no older than 10. V led from the front, her hand always near the wall, like she could feel where the path would lead. After 2 hours they reached an underground chamber. It was wide and filled with old tech. V touched a stone, and the room lit up. A map appeared in the air. A full layout of Earth with red marks blinking fast. Ray looked closer and saw the truth. The queen had placed agents across the planet. Big cities, small towns, deserts, oceans, nowhere was untouched. The queen was not just a ruler, she was a net, and they were caught inside. Suddenly, the map blinked red and a sharp sound filled the chamber. The queen had found them. V looked around and made a fast choice. She turned to the stone-skinned leader and spoke in her language. He nodded with a heavy heart. She then grabbed Ray's hand and pulled him toward a second tunnel. This one went up, not down. Ray wanted to stay and fight, but V whispered again, "No hero dead." They climbed fast as the chamber below prepared for war. The sound of weapons charging, the quiet prayers of those who stayed, and the song of resistance that needed time to grow. Ray and V reached the surface on the other side of the forest. Smoke rose behind them. The queen's fire had begun. They ran through the trees until they found a small crashed ship covered in vines. V used her code to open it, and the door hissed like an old dragon breathing again. Inside, the lights blinked and screens woke from sleep. Ray took the pilot seat. V sat beside him. She looked at him with calm strength and said one word, "Broadcast." Ray activated the comms. They were old, but still alive. V spoke into the channel in English. Her voice was not loud, but it carried weight. "This is V of Zandaria, once protector, now fugitive, now witness. The queen has lied. The truth lives in the hunted. If you hear this, know you are not alone." Then she sent the message into open space. Ray looked at her. She looked forward into the sky. For the first time the hunted had spoken, and the sky was listening. The signal moved through space like a spark across dry ground. It touched old radios and empty ships and broken helmets buried in dust. It found ears that had forgotten sound and hearts that had forgotten hope. V's voice echoed across the stars and into places the queen could not silence. The queen heard it too in her golden chamber deep inside the ship that floated above Earth. She stood alone. Her eyes were not calm anymore. They burned like fire trapped in glass. She looked at the faces on the screens around her. Advisors, soldiers, spies, all waiting for her command. Her voice came like thunder wrapped in silk. "End this now." On the surface, Ray and V stood near the old ship that had carried the message. The trees behind them were burning. The sky was no longer blue. Smoke clouds covered the sun like a blanket of war, but from far away help began to rise. Small ships from hidden moons came through cracks in space. Each carried refugees, warriors, and survivors who had heard the call. They came not for revenge, they came for truth. Ray stood with a new suit made by the rebels. It was light, strong, and marked with a single symbol drawn by V, a broken chain. V wore armor from her past. She no longer looked like a lost girl. She stood like the protector she once was. Beside her, Ray stood not as a hero, but as a choice. Together they marched to the last battleground, a place where sky and ground met with fire. Between, the queen's army waited with machines and drones. They filled the air like insects with metal wings. Their eyes were cold, their hearts wired for silence. Ray looked at V. She nodded. The signal was sent from the forest, from the sea, from the hidden caves they came. The rebels, the forgotten, the hunted. They carried no flags, they carried each other. Battle began with light. Weapons flashed across the sky like falling stars. The sound was not just fire, it was voices rising. Ray moved through the field with purpose. He was not trained, but he was not afraid. He knew who he stood for. V moved like a storm. Fast, sharp, silent. She fought not to win, but to remind. That courage still had shape. The queen watched from above. She saw her army fall in pieces. She saw the cracks in her control. She stepped onto her throne deck and spoke a single command: bring them to me. A large ship landed in the center of the battlefield. It opened like a mouth and released guardians shaped like fear. 10 feet tall, 4 arms each, eyes without color. Ray turned to face them, but V held his arm. She said one word: alone. She walked forward with the crown she had once protected. Now nothing but a memory in her eyes. The guardians circled her, but she did not stop. She entered the ship and the door closed behind her. Ray wanted to follow, but he knew this was not his part inside the ship. The queen stood beside her throne. She wore the same crown, but it no longer shined. V stepped forward without bowing. The queen smiled without warmth. Still standing, she said. V said nothing. Queen raised her hand, and the guardians prepared to strike. V threw a small device to the floor. It burst with light and showed the memory again, the chains, the betrayal, the silence. This time the queen's guards saw it too. Some turned their eyes away, some dropped their weapons. The queen shouted, but her voice cracked. She moved toward V with power in her hands. V raised her arm and activated the core. Ray had given her a small crystal full of pure energy pulled from the broken ship. The queen's power met the core in a wave of light. The ship shook. Outside, the sky turned gold and white. Ray looked up as the ship cracked open like an egg of light. A soft wind passed through the battlefield, and the machine stopped. V stood in the center of the broken ship, her armor gone, her eyes closed. She fell to her knees. Ray ran to her and caught her before she touched the ground. She looked at him and smiled. Then she whispered, "You chose right," and everything went quiet. The sky was silent after the storm. No fire, no metal, no fear, only wind. The battlefield had turned into ashes and stillness. Machines lay broken like statues of forgotten gods. Ships no longer flew, weapons no longer hummed, and in the middle of it all, Ray held V in his arms. Her skin had gone pale, and her breath was soft like air fading into space. The core had burned through her body, but she had not let go until the queen was gone. She had given everything to protect something she once believed had already died. Ray looked at her, and his hands trembled. He had never held something so heavy, not in weight, but in meaning. The others began to gather around. Refugees, rebels, children of the stars. None spoke. They simply watched. A beam of light rose from the remains of the queen's ship. It carried no voice, no message, only memory. Across the world, screens lit up. Across every planet under the queen's control, a single message appeared: the queen has fallen. Truth cannot be silenced. V of Zendaria. Lives in your story now. The people watched in silence, and for the first time in many lifetimes, they were not afraid. Ray carried V to the edge of the field where the grass had started to grow again. He laid her down gently and touched her face. Her eyes opened just once, only for a second. She looked at the sky, then at him, then the sky again, and she smiled. Weeks passed. The war ended not with treaties, but with silence. The soldiers who had followed the queen removed their armor. Some went home. Some stayed to help rebuild. The crown was not claimed. There was no throne left to sit on. Only questions left behind like footprints in dust. Ray did not speak to the leaders. He did not join the speeches. He returned to the forest where it all began. He built a small home near the railway cabin. He fixed the walls, replanted the trees, carved signs in the wood that only he could read. He placed the glowing core deep inside a stone so that it would never be used again, only remembered each year. On the day the sky had turned gold, he walked to the same field and sat in silence. Sometimes others came. Sometimes they brought flowers. Sometimes they brought stories, but always they left a single word carved in their language. And his V. One day a small ship landed near Ray's home. It was quiet and shaped like a seed. A woman stepped out holding the hand of a young girl. Girl had violet eyes and a calm smile. She looked at Ray without fear. She walked to him and sat beside him under the tree. She did not speak, but in her eyes Ray saw something that felt like a whisper. V had chosen more than truth. She had chosen hope. The girl reached into her pocket and pulled out a small cube. It glowed faintly. Ray recognized it at once. The message began to play. It was old. It was simple. V's voice. If you are hearing this, then the silence is over. If you are hearing this, then you survived. If you are hearing this, then it was worth it. Ray closed his eyes and let the wind carry the words into the trees. He felt the weight in his chest lift like fog leaving the river. The girl stood and took his hand. She pointed at the stars, then at herself, then at him. Ray smiled, because he understood the story had never been about kings or queens, not even about war. It had always been about a choice, one human, one alien, one moment where fear could have won, but didn't. Back as when the universe gave him the queen, he chose the one who had nothing and gave her everything.